an architecture media podcast supported by the Australian Institute of Architects, produced on Boon Wurrung country.
Welcome to Design Speaks Weekly, a podcast that explores the biggest stories in Australian architecture and design. I'm your host, Georgia Birks, and today I speak with Monique Woodward, Director of WOWOWA Architecture and Interiors. We discuss the intentions of International Women's Day and question if we need a different approach to the celebrations. But first, here's the latest news headlines from Architecture AU.
In the news this week, early designs have been released for the Sunshine Transport Super Hub, part of the $4 billion first stage of the Melbourne Airport Rail Link. The project will deliver more than 6 kilometres of new and upgraded track between West Footscray and Albion, as well as establish a super hub in Sunshine and redevelop Tottenham Station. Meanwhile, Melbourne Airport has separately announced a $4.5 billion upgrade of its international terminal, including 5 new gates and expanded check-in and baggage claim areas. And the new Glasshouse Theatre at the Queensland Performing Arts Centre in Brisbane, designed by Snowheader and Blight Rayner, is set to officially open this week. 7 years in the making, its rippled glass design was selected in an international design competition held in 2019. And to round out the news, Chinese architect Xu Tiantian has been named the 5th recipient of the annual Mecca Times National Gallery of Victoria Women in Design Commission. For her 2026 commission, she will present Bamboo Theatre, an installation inspired by the bamboo landscapes and building traditions of Songyang County. Those are the headlines for this week. For the full stories and more news, visit architectureau.com. I'm Adair Winder. It's Tuesday, March 3.
In March 1911, over 1 million people protested across Europe to mark the first ever International Women's Day, a landmark moment in the long fight for women's suffrage and labour rights. While International Women's Day remains an important day of protest around the world, many question if its original purpose has been lost. To unpack this today, I'm joined by Monique Woodward, Principal and Creative Director at WOWOWA Architecture and Interiors. Monique formerly served on the Australian Institute of Architects' National Gender, Equity, Diversity and Impact Committee and continues to be a staunch advocate for gender equity in the built environment. Hello, Monique, and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Monique, the origins of International Women's Day date back to the early 1900s, where women marched and rallied to fight for the women's rights to vote, work and hold public office. Today, some feel the purpose of the event has been diluted by the inundation of morning teas, brunches and celebrations. What are your thoughts on this, and how can the architecture and design industry avoid superficial corporate feminism and make International Women's Day more meaningful and perhaps provocative?
Just a small question to start off with. I love it. Right. I guess I feel like it's critical for me to really start off with a frame that really does acknowledge the privileged space that I'm coming to these discussions with. I think it's important to speak from that authentic place that, this really is my experience and that it's really coming from, 16 years of practice where I've leveraged a lot of debt, made a lot of investments. Like, I guess we are this kind of mid-career practice at this point, and a younger version of me would have had no idea that I would have ended up in this place. And so, I think that there's been a lot of, maybe shame or feelings of behindness or stuckness that I feel like I've dealt with myself from looking at, the next gen above me or even looking further ahead of that. And so I think these answers that I give really are to offer provocations and inspiration to people, and that they can take what they want and then leave the rest. And I think that, that permission piece was critical for me. And I guess I was reflecting that I wish I'd been able to internalize that when I was listening to my mentors, potentially. So I'm really passionate about International Women's Day. I'm moderating the Australian Institute of Architects Women's Day event that's coming up very soon. The purpose of it for me is kind of this wonderful reset and a remembering that actually, as an industry, we do have 5 generations practicing. We've got, a lot of retired members that come to those events, and then Gen X, boomers, millennials, we've got the full gamut, Gen Zs. And so I think that there's this wonderful mentorship that we can all marinate in those days, that we kind of get around a champagne cauldron and discuss things and, help each other and sink deeper and deeper into a sense of community. And I think really that's the purpose of it, to kind of make everyone feel that they're not alone, that these problems or issues or challenges are all very universal, and remind us to get together a lot more, I think. I have a group of amazing female architects that I get together with maybe every quarter, and, we're very deliberate that instead of just kind of chatting about our kids and things like that, that we're actually very purposefully go around the table and sort of say what's a rub, like what's a challenge that we've experienced that in the last few months. We all workshop it together, and everyone's different. It's a multi-generational kind of group, and everyone's different perspectives are kind of amazing and very, kind of critical to that problem-solving piece. And then we talk about a celebration. So we talk about what we're really proud of, and I feel like the collection of those, as we go around the table, it's kind of very fulfilling, and you walk away feeling like, your cup is full and it's this really great experience. But then, sometimes we'll go to somewhere really fancy and it's interesting. You look around and there's just we're the only group of women there, right? Like whereas there's so many tables of men who are just getting together in this casual kind of BD way, and they're talking it out, they're hashing it out. It's more that we're just not seeing it. So I think it's kind of a nice reminder to make the effort when you can get so caught in the weeds. So just to lift your head up a little bit and seek out advice and help.
So you would say that, International Women's Day as an event is a reminder to actually find your community of women who you can talk about issues and challenges with business, life and everything in a more youthful way, perhaps.
Yeah, with a sense of optimism, I guess, right?
Mm-mm. Because topics such as the gender pay gap and unbalanced family roles and unpaid work are obviously frequently discussed at International Women's Day architecture events. And you just touched on this in your answer before then, but are there any issues that you feel aren't raised and should be addressed at these sort of more corporate events? Or do you think that there are certain things that should just remain in your community of women?
I mean, I guess the piece for me that feels like it's missing maybe is that optimism piece, or maybe just, again, there's permissions to say we're not victims, actually, that, I feel like we know the issues. We all are so aware of them and feel it every day. But I think it's important to kind of flip the script at some point and go, we have full agency over ourselves. If, Instagram doom scrolling has told us anything, we really do have the power to change and to be more and to leave a situation that's not serving us, and that really it is kind of this failure of imagination on some level to kind of seek out a new reality. And I say that with so much compassion and so much understanding for, the times that I've felt really victimized and stuck and in my own life. But I guess, the embellishing the truth that everything changes, the only constant is change. And so how do we kind of pivot out, even if we have to drag ourselves and maybe a whole bunch of people behind us, or we're dragging our family or whoever it is. I think, we really do have the capacity to change our lives. And I believe in that so vehemently.
Changes can be a really scary thing for some. And I think, as you're saying, if you can find that group of women where you can talk about things very openly with no judgment, but with sort of advice, that gives you the courage or it's a safe space to kind of give you the courage to make those really big leaps.
Yeah. And to also to say when you've done enough. I personally was on National Council for 10 years or, at the Institute and served for that amount of time. And it was almost that group of women that basically said, you know what, you've done so much. Thank you for your service. You don't need to continue. It's okay to take a break if you're tired. Because I guess I was sort of communicating that was true for me. And, that was so incredible to hear and to feel that flood my nervous system. Because really, I think, unpacking your own limiting beliefs around your situation and the inner work that we need to all do, I think is that sort of divine feminine piece.
Speaking of feminism, actually, and obviously this whole conversation is framed in the architecture and design industry. Do you think self-expression of femininity in architecture and construction is suppressed? If so, how does a day like International Women's Day actually contribute to changing mindsets and attitudes about this? I
mean, I think every human has both feminine energy and masculine energy, right? Like, I think that's, I feel like the ultimate skill is working out when to deploy each one. Architects, I think that our training is very masculine. The way that we're taught to show up in practice and also within, client groups or larger kind of, consultancy groups, it is with this masculine energy that I think to speak up and to always mirror the energy of a bully or something, to not show weakness and to kind of, stand up for what's right. And, whilst I do really, I really do see that can work sometimes, I think more and more I've been thinking around how do we play to win? Like, how do we play to our strengths and to not speak and to work out how you can almost depower or like de-escalate a situation by just finding another road that's more efficient, that doesn't cost you your own sanity, your own energy, right? That you don't want to be drained. You want to be energized and you want to feel like you're sitting in your own truth and power and always fronting with that energy.
And following along your values, right?
Yeah, I guess. And like, so I think sinking into that and not ignoring our intuition and then just saying, I will not be aggressive in the workplace. And that's just unnecessary. But then I'm not going to be quiet either. It's more that I'm being smart and using the relationships that we have and the skills that we have to just find an easier path that feels in flow.
Yep. I think language and communication is really an important tool to master, because even the way that your body, your body language can share meaning is really quite critical. And I think there's a difference between saying what you need to say and just being aggressive and trying to say something for, just for the sake of it, which is always unhelpful. And as you say, energy draining. And let's be honest, everybody rolls their eyes.
Yeah, I love Shelley Penn gave me the best bit of advice. It was wait. So it was to ask the question of why am I talking? I feel like I'll never integrate a better piece of advice because it's so critical. And then once you kind of embody that, you realize how much people are just like talking absolute rubbish. And there's so much power in the silence and the observation of others, and that's kind of holding complexity and being strategic and being a leader that's magnetic. And I think that's the piece that, we all want to walk towards.
Mon, many agree that the intent of International Women's Day should be an everyday practice. What does everyday advocacy for gender equality look like for you in professional and personal life? Is it what you've sort of been talking about, building your own community, or is it more than that?
I remember being called a B Corp evangelist at one time, but I guess in some ways I kind of am, I believe that B Corp certification does heal a lot and does change the DNA of a business. And so I couldn't be more proud of our certification, but also just how many architecture practices have actually kind of got on board with that, because it really is about social sustainability. And so, the issues really are bigger than just like a feminist gaze or ideology. It is about fixing this holistic system, that the future isn't female or male. It's about the union and polarity and understanding everyone has different skills and understanding how we can work together. So I guess in our practice, we've been doing quite a lot of workshopping. So it's almost like corporate therapy. How do we all step into our own alignment? How do we speak to our vision? How do we create better senses of belonging? How do we make sure everyone's, I feel like women are great at like getting all the ducks in a line. And so it's like, how do we move holistically into the future, into a sort of relatively unknown future as well? There's always that question of more flexibility, less flexibility, but really it's about boundaries and understanding where we end and another person begins. And that individuation from a personal perspective is really useful, but then also from a corporate perspective or a business or a studio to understand what's. And I think that other consultants are really good at that, right? Like they're like, no, that's the mechanical engineer. Like, no, that's the civil, like they have very clear kind of remits. Whereas because we're such big generalists, that's a bit more problematic. But I think that it's still very possible and something that we're working on a lot.
That sounds great, Mon. Look, we've come to the end of our episode. So, of course, I want to ask you our final question, which we ask all our guests. What's something that you've changed your mind about?
Yeah, I think we sort of grew up with this idea that we're not female architects, that we're just architects. and I think I sort of subscribed for that, but it never really truly felt aligned to me because I guess that spoke to us being so general and all the same. Whereas I guess I realized that I just want to be a witch, right? Like I want to be
around your champagne cauldron.
Yeah, like I want to embody like the wisdom of everyone that's come before, the people that I've learnt from. I'm wanting to be aligned and integrated and to acknowledge that I have a daughter and that I can't, I need to make space for that in my life and I want to be a storyteller and to step further into that because it's what I love and for it to be okay and to embrace the full spectrum, the highs and the lows and the kind of, roller coaster some days of womanhood and to allow, the whole team to feel that that's okay and that there's space for it all and the full spectrum that's really around self-love and self-compassion and then nourishment.
Yeah, so you're embracing and celebrating the label of a female architect. That's lovely, Mon. Well, it's been really great to hear your take on today's topic. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode, which is supported by the Australian Institute of Architects. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to subscribe, share, or leave a rating. I'm Georgia Birks, and this has been Design Speaks Weekly. Design Speaks Weekly is produced on Boonwurrung country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture.